Greetings, dear viewer, and welcome to Purposes Crossed, where I hope that people who are called by Jesus for different purposes cross paths and exchange ideas. In this video, we continue with our series of devotions on the Psalms, and today we will deal with Psalm 22. Due to the fact that Jesus quotes the first verse of the psalm from the cross, this psalm is often taken as a prophetic psalm, and we are devoting 3 videos to this psalm, and this is the second one. In the previous video, we looked at the nature of language in prophecies inside poetry, and we saw that poetic language is fluid and can be made to serve any interpretation. We also saw that because of this fluidity, we can always look back on an event and assert that the poem was a prophecy about that event. Because of this, we have concluded that we should refrain from basing any doctrine too heavily on parts of poetry. We also concluded that it is highly unlikely that anyone before Jesus' crucifixion ever read or sang Psalm 22, imagining it was a prophetic psalm with a meaning anywhere close to what we Christians ascribe to the psalm. So with that out of the way, how would Old Testament believers have understood this psalm, given that they could not have thought of any event similar to Jesus' crucifixion? Without a reference to Jesus, this psalm still has a lot to teach us. There are many times when we face immeasurable hardships and our prayers for deliverance have not been answered. We may begin to believe that God has deserted us. Mind you, the psalm makes it very clear that David is clueless about the reasons for his suffering. Not once in the psalm does David admit to having done anything wrong, anything to deserve the hardships he was facing. For there are times when the suffering we experience is inexplicable, and we can search all we want for reasons and still come up lacking and clueless. The message of the psalm does not lie in the way David describes his suffering. Whether people mock you or gang up on you is not the point of the psalm. Whether you are feeling physically and emotionally drained is also not the only circumstances under which you can genuinely recite the psalm. The core message of the psalm is, "But you, O Lord, do not be far away. O my help, come quickly to my aid." It is a heartfelt cry to God for deliverance in a situation where we are unsure how to act. Now, mind you, David was a very resourceful person. He had gotten into many difficult situations in the past. Yet, in Psalm 22, it seems like he was completely overwhelmed with what he was facing. He could not think of a way out, even from his wide past experience. But we can see one strand running through the psalm that is genuinely encouraging. David says, "In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame." We can see that trusting God is never a vain activity. When we are at our wits' end, when no solution seems available to take us out of that disastrous situation in which we find ourselves, trusting God is the only recourse for the believer. But David assures us that God honors this trust. Indeed, David goes on to say, "Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights." God, according to David, is eager to deliver those in whom he delights. And committing our cause to him is the way in which we ask him to act on our behalf, to save us and rescue us from the disaster that stares us in the face. Towards the end of the psalm, David sings, "To him indeed shall all who sleep in the earth bow down. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust." From the perspective of the Old Testament, this is intriguing because going down to Sheol was supposed to be something that made it impossible to praise God. For example, in Psalm 6 verse 5, David sings, "For in death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol, who can give you praise?" So what was David singing about in Psalm 22? He seems to be opening up to the possibility that death is not the end of a person, but that even in death there is some level of consciousness. But he is not at the point of resurrection. Nevertheless, the opening up of the possibility that death is not the end allows for later development that will lead to a belief in a resurrection as in Daniel chapter 12 and further recognition of what happened to Jesus on the first Easter. But we are a long way from this full-blown belief in the resurrection in Psalm 22 and have to be satisfied with the understanding that David recognizes that death cannot be the end of things because God, who is just and establishes justice, must do so for those who have faced injustice and died unjustly. In the third video on Psalm 22, we will look at interpreting this psalm in light of Jesus' crucifixion, and we will see that the event of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection shed such strong light on the psalm that a complete overhauling was required in its interpretation.